Hi guys. Tonight we are going to drift back through the centuries, leaving the noise of the modern world behind to explore a quiet, often overlooked corner of the past. We're going to imagine what life was truly like for the women who lived in the margins of historical societies, those who lived alone, without a husband or a father to define their place in the world. It is a story of soft shadows, steady hands, and the profound, rhythmic peace of a solitary life in a late medieval town. The sun has long since dipped below the timbered gables of the street, leaving the sky a bruised velvet purple. In this small corner of a bustling European town, the air is cooling, carrying the faint, earthy scent of wood smoke and the damp stones of the nearby river. Inside a modest stone house, tucked away down a narrow, winding alley where the cobbles are worn smooth by generations of footsteps, a single candle flickers on a heavy oak table. The flame is small, a golden bead of light in the gathering gloom, and it casts long dancing shadows against the whitewashed walls. Here lives a woman whose name has faded from the great ledgers of history, but whose presence is felt in the meticulous order of her small domain. She is alone, and in the silence of her home. There is a heavy, comforting weight to the air. She moves with a slow, practiced grace, her woolen skirt sweeping softly against the floorboards with a sound like a distant sigh. Her day does not end with the clamorous arrival of a tired man or the high-pitched demands of children. Instead, it settles around her like a well-worn cloak. To live alone in this era is to exist in a delicate balance. The town outside her heavy oak door is a place of guilds, of patriarchal lineages, and of strict social tiers, where a woman is usually defined by her relation to a male protector. Yet, here she is, a widow, or perhaps a woman who never wed, carving out a space of quiet independence. There is a melancholy beauty in this solitude, a sense of being a ghost in a world of solid structures, yet possessing a freedom that her married sisters might only dream of. In the fleeting moments before sleep, she reaches for a pewter pitcher, the metal cool and slightly rough against her skin. The water pours into a ceramic basin with a rhythmic, splashing music that seems to echo in the stillness. Every movement is intentional. In the absence of conversation, the senses become heightened. She notices the way the candlelight catches the dust motes dancing in the air, turning them into tiny sparks of gold. She feels the coarse texture of the linen towel as she dries her hands, the scent of lavender and dried herbs clinging to the fabric from the chest where it was stored. This is her ritual, the quiet maintenance of a life held together by her own two hands. Outside, the town is settling. The distant clang of the cathedral bell rings out for Compline, a deep, resonant vibration that shivers through the glass of her small, leaded windows. It is a sound that marks the passage of time for everyone, yet to her, it feels like a personal signal to withdraw further into herself. She hears the muffled clip-clop of a lone horse on the main thoroughfare, the sound fading into the distance until it is swallowed by the night. A dog barks once, a sharp sound that is quickly muffled by the thick stone walls. These are the sounds of a world she belongs to, yet stands apart from. In the marketplace during the day, she is a familiar figure, perhaps a seamstress or an herbalist, respected for her skill but always viewed with a touch of curiosity, a slight wariness. A woman without a master is a puzzle to the medieval mind, a deviation from the natural order that requires a certain quiet strength to maintain. She settles into a high-backed, wooden chair near the hearth, where the embers of the day's fire are still glowing a dull, pulsing red. She takes up a piece of fine embroidery, the silk threads shimmering like spider silk in the dim light. Her needle moves with an effortless precision, dipping in and out of the taut fabric. Stitch, pull, whisper. It is a meditative rhythm. She thinks of the women in the grand houses, surrounded by servants and kin, whose lives are loud and cluttered with the expectations of legacy. Her own legacy is written in these stitches, in the cleanliness of her hearth, and in the jars of preserved fruit that line her cellar shelves. There is a quiet pride in the way she manages her woodpile, ensuring the fire lasts through the damp winters, and the way she negotiates with the charcoal burner or the grain merchant, her voice steady and clear despite the subtle dismissals she often encounters. The room is filled with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and the faint, lingering aroma of the vegetable pottage she ate for her evening meal. It is a simple life, stripped of excess. The challenges she faces are not the grand dramas of the court, but the quiet, persistent pressures of survival. A leaking roof, a cold draft, the rising price of tallow, these are the things she contends with alone. And yet, there is a profound sweetness in the autonomy. She chooses when to wake, when to eat, and when to let the silence wrap around her. In the darkness, the walls of her house seem to draw closer, offering a sanctuary from the judgmental whispers of the town square. She is the mistress of her own time, a rare and precious commodity in an age where most lives are bartered away to the needs of others as she works. Her mind wanders to the seasons. She remembers the spring when the mud of the streets made every errand a labor, and the summer when the heat turned the town into a cauldron of smells and noise. But autumn and winter are her seasons. They justify the inward turn, the closing of shutters, and the long hours spent by the fire. The melancholy of the dying year mirrors her own internal landscaper, place of soft greys and muted browns, of endurance and quiet reflection. She is not lonely, not in the way the world imagines. Loneliness is a sharp, biting wind. What she feels is more like the deep, cool water of a well still, profound, and self-contained. She pauses, resting her hands on the embroidery frame. The candle has burned down, the wick curling into a blackened spiral. She watches a single bead of wax journey down the side of the candle, freezing into a pale, opaque tear. The silence of the house is absolute now, a thick blanket that muffles even the heartbeat of the town. She thinks of the other women like Hertha Beguines in their quiet communities, the widows in their small cottages on the edge of the forest. They are a sisterhood of the solitary, connected not by blood or law, but by the shared experience of standing on the outside looking in. They understand the weight of a key in a pocket, the significance of a door that only they have the right to lock. The air in the room has grown colder, the chill of the stone floor beginning to seep through her leather slippers. She rises, her joints giving a soft, sympathetic creak as she moves toward the bed tucked into the corner of the room. It is a simple pallet, but the linens are crisp and smell of the sun that dried them days ago. She begins the process of undressing, a slow unraveling of the day's layers. The heavy woolen overdress is set aside, followed by the kirtle, until she is left in her thin linen shift. She feels the cool air on her skin, a refreshing contrast to the warmth of the hearth, before she climbs into bed. She walks to the window and pushes aside the heavy woolen curtain. Outside, the moon has risen, casting a silver sheen over the thatched roofs and the crooked chimneys of her neighbors. The world looks different in this light, stripped of its colors and its hierarchies. From up here, the town is a collection of shapes, a geometric puzzle of shadow and light. She sees a single light burning in a window across the way. a silent acknowledgement of another soul still awake in the deep night. She wonders if it is another woman, perhaps tending to a sick child or simply sitting in the same contemplative silence. For a moment, she feels a thread of connection, a silver line stretching across the dark alleyway. She turns back to the room and leans over the candle. With a soft breath, she blows out the flame. For a second, the glowing red tip of the wick remains, a tiny ember in the dark, before it too fades into blackness. The smell of charred wax and smoke lingers in the air, a final sensory note to the day. She navigates the familiar space by touch the corner of the table, the smooth post of the bed, the heavy weight of the quilts. She slides under the covers, the fabric cool at first, then rapidly warming with the heat of her body. The bed is her final fortress. Here, the expectations of the world cannot reach her. In the darkness, she is no longer the widow, the seamstress, or the woman who lives alone. She is simply a consciousness, drifting in the vast sea of the night. She listens to the house the way the timbers settle with a soft, woody groan, the way the wind catches the corner of the eaves and makes a low whistling sound. These are the voices of her home, the familiar sounds that have lulled her to sleep for years. They are the sounds of safety, of a space carved out of a world that didn't always want to give it. Her breathing slows, matching the rhythmic pulse of the quiet room. The thoughts of the dather, price of flour, the stitch in the blue silk. The greeting from the baker all begin to dissolve, like salt in water. They lose their edges, becoming soft and blurred. She feels her limbs grow heavy, sinking into the soft feathers of the mattress. The melancholy that touched her earlier has transformed into a deep, settling peace. It is the peace of the survivor, the quiet satisfaction of a day well spent in the service of one's own soul. The morning light does not burst into the room. It arrives as a pale, hesitant silver, filtering through the thick, hand-blown glass of the window panes. It touches the hem of the heavy woolen curtains first, then crawls across the uneven floorboards, illuminating the grain of the wood and the small, stubborn knots that have been polished by years of footfalls. The woman stirs, not because of a loud alarm or a sudden summons, but because her body is attuned to the gradual lifting of the dark. There is no rush to her movements. She lies for a moment in the warmth of the quilts, watching the way the light catches the lingering smoke from the hearth. This first hour of the day is hers alone, a quiet communion with the house before the world outside begins its clamorous awakening. She rises and wraps herself in a heavy kirtle, the fabric cool and stiff against her skin until her own warmth begins to soften it. Her first task is the fire. She kneels before the hearth, her movements slow and reverent, as if performing a morning prayer. She rakes through the grey ash to find the living coals, those small, pulsing hearts of orange that have survived the night beneath their powdery blanket. She feeds them thin shavings of pine, then larger sticks of oak, blowing gently until a small bright flame licks upward. The sound of the wood catching the sharp crackle and the soft hiss of saps, the first music of her day. It is a sound of survival and comfort, a small defiance against the damp chill that clings to the stone walls. With the fire established, she takes up 2 wooden buckets, their iron hoops cold to the touch. The walk to the communal well is a journey she could make blindfolded. As she steps out into the narrow street, the air is crisp, carrying the scent of frost and the briny temps of the distant sea. The cobbles are slick with dew, reflecting the pearly sky. At this hour, the town is a skeleton of itself. The market stalls are empty wooden frames, and the tavern doors are bolted tight. She meets few people, perhaps, a night watchman finishing his rounds, his eyes heavy with fatigue, or a friar hurrying toward the early mass, his sandals slapping rhythmically against the stone. They acknowledge her with a brief nod or a murmured greeting, but they do not linger. To the town, she is a fixture of the landscape, as constant and as silent as the parish pump. There is a quiet respect in their distance, born of the fact that she owes no one and asks for nothing. Yet, beneath that respect lies a thin veil of curiosity. They wonder how a woman alone fills the vast silence of her hours. They see her buying a single loaf of rye, a small wedge of hard cheese, or a handful of dried peas. And they cannot imagine a life that fits into such small measurements. To them, a life is a crowded table, a loud hearth, and a web of familial obligations. Her life, by contrast, is a singular thread, fine but remarkably strong. At the well, the rhythmic creak of the windlass is a heavy, metallic groan that echoes off the surrounding stone houses. She winds the rope with steady, rhythmic pulls, her muscles remembering the weight of the water long before the bucket breaks the surface. The water is dark and clear, shivering in the morning light. She carries the full buckets back to her home, her gait balanced and sure, the water swaying but never spilling. This water is precious. It will be used for her morning wash, for the small pot of herb tea she brews, and for the scouring of her stone doorstep. In a world where every drop must be earned by labor, nothing is wasted. Back inside, the house has begun to warm. She prepares a simple mealer bowl of warm grain porridge, sweetened with a tiny drop of honey from the jars she keeps in the cellar. She eats slowly, sitting by the window where she can watch the town begin to stir. The shadows are retreating now, and the first carts are rattling over the bridge, their iron-rimmed wheels creating a low, thunderous vibration that she feels in the soles of her feet. She watches a group of washerwomen heading toward the river, their laughter bright and sharp in the thin air. For a moment, she feels the pull of their companionship, the easy flow of gossip and shared labor. But then she looks back at her quiet room, at the sunbeam resting on her embroidery frame, and the feeling passes. Her solitude is not a lack of others, but a presence of self, a deliberate choice to keep. Her own company, the middle of the day is given over to the work that sustains her. Today, it is the mending of a heavy cloak for the merchant's wife, a woman of many words and little patience. The fabric is a deep, expensive crimson, thick and soft under her fingers. The woman works with a needle so fine it is almost invisible, her eyes focused on the intricate interplay of thread and weave. This is how she earns her place in the town's economy. Her hands are her currency. She works in the quiet trades, sewing, spinning, the drying of medicinal herbs. These are the skills that allow a woman to live in the gaps of a man's world. She is not a member of the great guilds, but the guildmasters' wives know that her stitches are the straightest and her herbal salves the most potent as she works. The sounds of the town filter in through the shutters. She hears the cry of the fishmonger, the rhythmic hammering from the blacksmith's forge, and the high, piping voices of children playing in the gutter. These sounds are like a tapestry, a background hum that reminds her she is part of a larger whole, even if she sits at the very edge of it. She reflects on the nature of her independence. It is not a loud or defiant thing. It is found in the way she mends her own roof tiles after a storm, the way she keeps her own accounts in a small, leather-bound book, and the way she navigates the market without a male shadow to lend her weight. There is a subtle melancholy in this reflection. a realization that her safety depends entirely on her own health and the continued strength of her hands. If she were to fall ill, there would be no son to fetch the wood, no husband to pay the apothecary. But this thought does not bring fear. Instead, it brings a sharpening of her senses, a deeper appreciation for the strength in her own arms. She accepts the fragility of her position with the same quiet grace she accepts the changing of the seasons. It is the price of her freedom, and it is a price she pays willingly every day. By mid-afternoon, the light begins to change, turning from a bright practical gold to a deeper, more honeyed hue. She sets aside her sewing and prepares for her daily walk. This is not a walk of necessity, but one of observation. She moves through the narrow, twisting streets, past the timber-framed houses that lean toward each other like old friends sharing a secret. She walks by the cathedral, where the scent of incense drifts out from the heavy doors, and down to the riverbank, where the water churns white against the stones of the bridge. People watch her past, the woman who lives alone. Some see her as a figure of pity, imagining a life of cold hearths and empty beds. Others see her with a touch of suspicion, wondering what secrets she keeps in the silence of her stone walls. There are whispers, of course, the inevitable rumors that follow any woman who does not fit the mold. They say she speaks to the birds, or that she knows the secrets of the moon. She hears these whispers sometimes, carried on a stray breeze, but they touch her no more than the mist touches the stone. She knows who she is, and that knowledge is an armor that no gossip can pierce. She stops at a small stall to buy a bundle of dried lavender and a few apples, the skin of the fruit taut and smelling of the orchard. The transaction is brief, a simple exchange of copper for goods. But she notices the way the merchant's eyes linger on her for a second longer than necessary, as if trying to read the story written in the lines of her face. She smiles, a small, private ghost of a smile, and moves on. She is a mystery to them, and there is a certain power in being a mystery. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, the town begins to contract. The noise of the market fades, the stalls are folded away, and the heavy gates of the town walls are prepared for closing. The evening air grows thick with the smell of roasting meat and the sour tank of ale from the taverns. It is a time of gathering, of families coming together around communal pots. For the woman, it is the time of the great narrowing. She returns to her home, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind her, with a finality that feels like a sigh of relief. The world is out there, and she is in here. She lights a single tallow dip, the small flame struggling against the blue shadows of the evening. The routine of the night begins. She prepares a simple supper, perhaps the apples roasted in the embers of the fire, served with a piece of dark bread. The flavors are clean and honest. She eats in silence, the only sound the occasional pop of a log in the hearth or the distant, muffled chime of the church bells. The solitude of the evening is different from the solitude of the morning. It is deeper, more contemplative. She takes up her mending again, but her hands are slow now, her mind wandering through the memories of her life. She thinks of the people she has lost, the faces that have faded into the mists of the past. She feels their absence not as a sharp pain, but as a soft, lingering ache, like the memory of a song. She realizes that her life is a collection of these absences, and that she has learned to build a home in the spaces they left behind. There is a profound acceptance in this, a recognition that life is not about holding on to everything, but about learning what to keep and what to let go. We shall let her rest in that deep, protective quiet for a moment longer. watching as the silver moonlight shifts its weight across the lime-washed walls, before the first grey hints of a new dawn begin to pull at the edges of the night. The transition from sleep to wakefulness for her is not a rupture, but a slow surfacing, like a leaf rising through still water. She wakes to the sound of a distant cockerel, its cry muffled by the thick stone of the town walls, sounding more like a memory of a sound than the sound itself. The air in her chamber is thin and sharp with the morning frost, and she pulls the heavy woolen coverlet tighter for one last heartbeat of warmth before the duties of her independence call her from the hearth of her bed. Her livelihood is a quiet tapestry of small skills, a collection of delicate trades that require more patience than strength. Today, the table in her main room is not set for a meal, but for the sorting of dried potatoes. Her hands, though calloused at the tips from the needle, are surprisingly gentle as they move among the brittle stalks of yarrow, the dusty grey leaves of sage, and the shriveled blue heads of lavender. There is a specific sound to this work, a dry, papery rustle that fills the silence of the room, a sound that feels as old as the earth itself. She breathes in the concentrated scent of the high summer, captured and held in these desiccated forms, and for a moment, the winter chill of the house is forgotten. She is the town's silent apothecary for those who cannot afford the physician's heavy fees or the elaborate concoctions of the spice merchant. Her remedies are simple: a syrup of coltsfoot for a winter cough, a poultice of comfrey for a bruised limb, a sachet of hops to bring sleep to a restless mind. She works with a rhythmic economy of motion: crush, sift, pour. The mortar and pestle provide a low, grinding bass note to the morning, a steady thud-thud that vibrates through the wood of the table and into her very bones. It is a grounding sensation, in a world that often feels precarious for a woman alone. The physical weight of her tools and the reliability of her recipes provide a sense of gravity, a tether to the tangible world. As the sun climbs high enough to touch the tops of the opposite gables, a soft, tentative rap sounds at her door. It is not the insistent pounding of a creditor or the loud summons of a neighbor, but a hesitant, rhythmic knocking. She wipes her hands on her apron and moves to the door, her footsteps making a soft, melodic creak on the floorboards, a sound she knows so well she can tell exactly which board she is standing on by the pitch of its groan. She opens the door to find a young girl, perhaps 12 years of age, wrapped in a shawl that is too thin for the season. The girl's eyes are wide, reflecting the dark interior of the house. She carries a small earthenware jar. "My mother says the baby will not settle," the girl whispers, her breath blooming in the cold air like a small white ghost. She asks if you have the sweet water still. The woman does not invite her in. Her home is a sanctuary, and she guards its threshold with a quiet ferocity. Instead, she nods once a slow, reassuring movement and retreats into the shadows of her pantry. She returns with a small vial of dill and fennel water, the liquid clear and pale as a winter sky. She places it in the girl's hand, her fingers brushing the child's cold skin for a fleeting second. 3 drops in the milk, the woman says, her voice low and unused, carrying the gravelly warmth of a hearth fire, and keep the child near the warmth of the chimney. The damp is the enemy of the small. The girl offers a small, coiner-thin, worn bit of silver and a quick, shy bob of a curtsy. "Thank you, mistress." Mistress. The title is a courtesy, a recognition of her status as a woman of age and skill, yet it carries a distance, too. To the girl, she is a figure of legend, a woman who lives in the house of herbs, someone who exists outside the normal flow of family and feast days. The woman watches the girl run back toward the bustling main street, her small figure swallowed by the shadows of the overhanging buildings. Then she closes the door, and the silence rushes back in to fill the space. Thick and sweet as honey, she spends the middle of the day at her second trade, the making of dipped tallow candles. This is a messier, more demanding task, requiring her to spend hours over a slow simmering vat of rendered fat. The smell is heavy and animal, a scent that speaks of the farmyards and the slaughterhouses. But she has learned to find the utility in it. She has a row of cotton wicks suspended from a wooden frame, and she dips them, one by one, into the melted tallow. Dip, lift, wait. The rhythm is hypnotic. Each dip adds a microscopic layer to the candle, a slow accumulation of substance. It is a metaphor for her life, the gradual building of security, layer by layer, through repeated, patient action. The candles grow fatter and paler with every circuit. She watches the way the liquid fat clings to the wick before cooling into a solid, opaque skin. There is a profound satisfaction in this creation. In a time when the coming of night is a physical weight, to be a maker of light is to hold a small, quiet power. She knows that these candles will find their way into the damp cellars of weavers, the study nooks of aging clerks, and the bedside tables of the fearful. Her work will push back the darkness in a dozen different homes, even as she sits in the deepening shadows of her own dot. By afternoon, the physical labor has left her with a pleasant ache in her shoulders. She washes her hands with a piece of harsh lye soap, the scent of the tallow slowly giving way to the clean, sharp smell of the cleanser. To reward herself, she prepares a small pot of tea from the dried raspberry leaves she gathered in the autumn. She sits by the small fire, the heat radiating against her shins, and picks up a piece of mending a heavy linen tunic belonging to the tanner's son. The fabric is coarse and stained, but her needle moves through it with the same grace it would accord to the finest silk dot as she sews. She reflects on the town's view of her. She knows she is a subject of quiet respect among the women who value her discretion and her knowledge. She is the one they come to when they have a secret or a sorrow that cannot be shared at the communal laundry. But she also knows that to the men of the council, she is an anomaly, a taxable unit without a head, a piece of the social fabric that doesn't quite weave into the larger pattern. They tolerate her because she is useful and because she is invisible. She has mastered the art of being seen without being noticed. She walks the streets with her head slightly bowed, her eyes focusing on the path ahead, her presence a neutral grey against the vibrant colours of the market. This invisibility is her greatest protection. It allows her to live without the interference of those who would see her settled or provided for. The sounds of the afternoon begin to shift. The heavy thud of the town's gates being tested, the rhythmic calling of the watch, the fading cries of the street hawkers. The world is drawing inward again. She finishes the tunic, folding it neatly and placing it on the bench by the door to be collected. Her day's work is done. The coins she earned, the silver from the girl, the copper promised for the tunic, the barter of grain for her candles, enough. They are always just enough. She does not seek wealth, for wealth brings attention, and attention is a flame that can burn a solitary life to the ground. She seeks only the continuation of the quiet. The evening meal is a simple farro bowl of thick leek soup that has been simmering on the edge of the hearth, its steam carrying the savoury earthy scent of the garden. She eats it with a crust of sourdough bread, the texture chewy and satisfying. There is no one to talk to, no one to demand her thoughts, and so she lets her mind drift. She thinks about the flow of the seasons, the way the light is already changing, promising a slow turn toward the spring. She thinks about the woodpile in the yard, calculating how many more weeks of warmth it holds. These are the thoughts of a ruler over a very small, very peaceful kingdom. After the meal, she performs her final ritual of the day. She takes one of her newly made candles, one that came out slightly crooked and thus unsuitable for Ceyland, lights it. The flame is steady and bright, casting a warm glow over her hands as she sits in her high-backed chair. She does not work now. This is the hour of the internal life. She simply sits, watching the flame, feeling the weight of her own existence. She feels a quiet resilience, a sense that she is like the old hawthorn tree on the edge of the commonald, perhaps unbent by the prevailing winds, but deeply rooted and stubbornly alive. She thinks of the solitude not as a void, but as a vessel. It is a space that she has filled with her own meanings, her own rhythms, and her own peace. The townspeople might see her life as a series of subtractions. No husband, no children, no grand house, but she sees it as a series of additions. She has added the knowledge of the herbs. She has added the skill of the needle. She has added the mastery of the fire. She has built a life that belongs to no one but herself. The candle flickers as a draft finds its way through a gap in the shutter. The shadows on the wall leap and dive, momentarily transforming her familiar room into a place of mystery. She is not afraid. The dark is her element. She knows every corner of this house, every creak of the floor, every scent of the season. She is as much a part of these stones as the mortar that holds them together. We shall stay here a while longer in the deep, protective quiet of the midnight hour, for the night is a vast and gentle sea, and she is a small, steady boat anchored in its calmest cove. The silence of the stone house is a living thing, a soft vibration that hums in the grain of the wood and the cool surface of the plaster. As the moon begins its slow, silver descent toward the serrated line of the western hills, the shadows in her room shift with a liquid grace, elongating and then dissolving into the velvet dark. There is no clock to strike the hour, only the steady, rhythmic pulse of her own heart and the occasional, distant lowing of a cow in the burgage plots beyond the walls, sound so hollow and mournful it seems to belong to the earth itself. In this profound stillness, the boundaries of her world feel both infinitely small and incredibly vast. To live without a man in this century is to inhabit a space that is technically vacant in the eyes of the law, yet overfilled with the quiet labor of existence. As she drifts in the shallows of sleep, her mind wanders back to the subtle, unspoken rules that govern her movements when the sun is high. She remembers the way she must hold her shoulder suktu signal, a modesty that is both a shield and a requirement. She remembers the way she must lower her voice when speaking to the grain merchant, ensuring her tone is neither too bold nor too supplicant, but a steady, neutral middle ground that allows the transaction to pass without friction. Society, in this late medieval town, is a finely woven tapestry where every thread is expected to be tethered to another. A daughter is tethered to a father, a wife to a husband, a nun to her order. To be a thread that hangs loose, as she does, is to invite the collective eye to linger a moment too long. It is not always a gaze of malice. Often, it is merely a profound confusion. She recalls the passing glances in the market square, the way the burgomaster's wives, draped in their heavy furs and guarded by servants, look at her with a mixture of pity and a strange, hidden envy. They see her carrying her own basket, choosing her own leeks, and paying with her own hard-earned coin, and they do not know where to place her in the hierarchy of their world. She is a woman, yet she possesses the autonomy of a masterless man, a paradox that the town's social grammar struggles to translate. There are the whispers, too, as soft as the rustle of dry leaves in an autumn gutter. She has heard them when she lingers near the baker's oven to catch the warmth on a Tuesday morning. They wonder why she hasn't remarried, why she hasn't sought the shelter of a kinsman's roof, or why she doesn't spend her evenings at the communal spinning circles. In their eyes, her solitude is a puzzle to be solved, a gap that needs to be filled. They do not understand that for her, the gap is the very air she breathes. The quiet of her home is not an emptiness. It is a fullness that she has carefully cultivated, like a garden grown in the ruins of a fortress. She thinks of the limitations, the small no's that hem in her life like the stone walls of the alley. She cannot join the great guilds, though her needlework surpasses that of many masters. She cannot hold office or speak in the town assembly, though she pays her hearth tax with more regularity than the drunkards at the Boar's Head. She must always be mindful of the scold's bridle, or the ducking stool, those heavy, shadow-drenched threats that the town uses to keep women's voices within the prescribed frequencies. Her resilience is not found in shouting against these walls, but in the quiet, steady way she navigates within them. She is like the ivy that grows between the stones, unobtrusive, persistent, and finding its own path to the light without ever demanding the wall be moved. The night deepens, and the air in the chamber grows even stiller. A small draught stirs the fringe of the wall hanging. A piece of heavy wool she wove herself during a particularly long winter years ago. The pattern is of vines and small, nameless birds, a forest of her own making. As the fabric sways, it makes a sound like a distant sigh, a soft she that joins the chorus of the house. This is her true society, the objects she has chosen, the tools she has mastered, and the silence she has befriended. In the dark, the judgments of the townspeople feel as thin and inconsequential as the morning mist. What does it matter what they whisper in the light, when the night treats her with such profound equality? She remembers a moment from 3 days past, a small encounter that stayed with her like a burr on a woolen hem. She had been crossing the bridge, her arms full of dried rushes for her floor, when she encountered the parish priest. He is a man of good intentions but narrow vision, his world defined by the leather-bound volumes of his liturgy. He had stopped her, his shadow falling long and dark over the wooden planks. "Mistress," he had said, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of the pulpit, "the winter is long for those who sit by a single candle. My sister has a place in her kitchen for one who knows the herbs. It would be a godly thing to be under a roof of kin." She had looked at him, her eyes tracing the familiar lines of his face, and she had seen not a threat, but a misunderstanding. He saw a soul in peril because she was a soul alone. She had offered him a small, respectful inclination of her head, her voice as calm as the river flowing beneath them. "The candle is small, Father, but it burns bright enough for the room I inhabit. I thank your sister for her kindness, but my hearth is already lit." The silence that followed had been heavy, filled with the sound of the water churning against the pilings. He had not understood. He could not conceive of a life where the single candle was enough. He saw only the coldness of the stones she lived among, while she felt only the heat of the independence she had forged from them. He had walked away with a sigh, leaving her to her rushes and her river, and she had felt a brief, sharp pang of melancholy, not because she wanted his sister's kitchen, but because the world was so determined to save her from a life she had worked so hard to build As she sleeps, her hands twitch slightly on the quilt, a phantom movement of the needle or the herb knife. Even in rest, her body remembers the labor of herself. It is a slow, rhythmic dance of survival. She thinks of the women who are protected, the ones whose lives are a series of permissions and boundaries set by others. She thinks of the heavy weight of their silences, the things they cannot say to their husbands, the dreams they must bury beneath the duties of the household. Her own silence is different. It is an open thing, a space where she can speak to herself without fear of correction. The town outside is a labyrinth of rules, but inside these walls she has written her own laws. The law of the morning water, the law of the midday stitch, the law of the evening ember. There is a great, settling peace in this. The limitations imposed by society are like the weather. She cannot change them, so she has learned to dress accordingly. She wears her solitude like a heavy, well-oiled cloak that keeps out the rain of judgment. The moon has moved further now, its light retreating from the floor and climbing the foot of her bed. It illuminates the coarse texture of the linen sheets, turning the tiny fibers into threads of silver. The cold has intensified, a sharp, crystalline presence that makes the timbers of the house contract with a sudden, loud crack. She does not wake, but her breathing hitches for a second before smoothing out again. In her dream, she is walking through a forest where the trees are made of glass, their branches ringing like bells in a soft wind. She is alone there too, but she is the only one who knows the path, and the glass does not cut her. It only reflects the light she carries in her own hands. She reflects on the feeling of being alone yet surrounded. It is a peculiar intimacy. She knows the sounds of the neighboring houses, the muffled cough of the blacksmith's wife, the rhythmic thud of the loom next door, the high-pitched yapping of the tanner's small dog. She is part of the street's breathing, a single lung in the body of the town. Her independence does not mean isolation. It means a different kind of connection, one that is elective rather than compulsory. She chooses to be a neighbor, chooses to be a trader, chooses to be a silent observer of the passing parade. There is a quiet acceptance in her heart, a realization that her life is a small, perfect circle in a world of jagged lines. The town may view her with suspicion, but the stones of her house view her with familiar warmth. The cat that sometimes visits her doorstep doesn't care about her marital status. The herbs in her garden don't ask for a man's name before they grow. Nature and the elements accept her without question, and she has found that this is enough. The night watchman's voice drifts in again. Further away this time, a ghostly all's well that seems to dissolve before it even reaches her window. It is the deep hour, the time when the soul is said to wander furthest from the body. If her soul is wandering, it is likely standing on the bridge, looking down at the dark water, watching the way the stars are mirrored in the ripples. It is looking at the town with a gentle, detached compassion, seeing all the people huddled in their beds, bound by their fears and their expectations, and it is feeling a profound sense of lightness. The melancholy she sometimes feels is not a weight, but a colorous soft twilight blue that shades the edges of her joy. It is the melancholy of knowing that this peace is fragile, that time is a river, and that the world is always pressing in. We shall stay with her, suspended in this indigo cradle of the night, for the deepest hours are when her house truly becomes a living thing, breathing in sync with the slow, cooling stones of the town. The transition from the active twilight to the profound midnight is not a sudden event, but a gradual shedding of the world's noise, like the slow settling of silt in a clear mountain pool. The evening begins for her when the bells of the great minster toll the curfew a deep, bronze vibration that travels through the earth and the soles of her feet, signaling that the fires of the town must be banked, and the heavy gates of the city walls swung shut. For many, this is a signal of confinement, but for her, it is the drawing of a protective curtain, a celestial permission to finally turn her gaze inward. She moves through her small chamber with a fluid, unhurried grace, her hands knowing the location of every object by the way the air feels around them. The lighting of her evening candle is a ceremony of gratitude. She takes a slender splinter of pine, ignites it from the dying glow of the hearth, and carries the tiny dancing flame to a tallow dip set in a heavy iron holder. The wick catches with a soft, celebratory hiss, and suddenly the room is transformed. The shadows retreat to the corners, huddling behind the heavy oak chest and the stacked bundles of dried meadowsweet. The light is warm and amber, casting a flickering glow that softens the hard edges of the stone walls and turns the humble whitewash into a surface of hammered gold. She settles into her favorite placer, low wooden stool placed near the small leaded window that looks out upon the narrow artery of the street. This window is her eye upon the world, a place where she can observe the theatre of the town without being a character upon its stage. The glass is old and full of whirls and imperfections, making the world outside look like a moving painting, distorted and dreamlike. She rests her chin upon her hand, the skin of her palm slightly rough from the day's labor, and listens. At this hour, the town is settling its accounts with the day. She hears the muffled thud of a neighbor's heavy door, the iron bolts sliding home with a sound of finality. She hears the rhythmic slop-slop of water being tossed from an upper window into the central gutter, and the brief, sharp protest of a cat startled by the splash. These are the punctuations of the evening, the small domestic commas in the long sentence of the night. Further away, from the direction of the market square, the last echoes of a tavern song drift upward, a low, melodic grumble that is soon swallowed by the damp air. Her thoughts begin to wander, unmoored from the practicalities of bread and thread. She reflects on the nature of her life, seeing it not as a series of events, but as a collection of textures and moments. She remembers the hands of her mother, which were always stained with the juice of walnut husks, and the way the old woman had taught her that a house has a memory of its own. She thinks of the years she spent in the service of others, the long days of yes, mistress, and no, master, when her time was a commodity bought and sold by the hour. That time feels like a different life now. A distant country she once visited but no longer calls home. The solitude she inhabits now is a gift she gave to herself, paid for in the currency of courage and quiet persistence. She thinks of the way the townspeople look at her as if she were a book written in a language they can almost but not quite decipher. They see her as the widow or the lone woman, labels that are meant to define her boundaries. But in the soft light of the candle, she knows she is a library of experiences that have nothing to do with those labels. She is the smell of rain on hot slate. She is the precise tension of a linen thread. She is the secret knowledge of which root will break a fever, and which will bring a deep dreamless sleep. The candle gutters as a tiny moth, drawn to the light, circles the flame in a frantic, silent dance. She gently cups her hand to guide the creature away, her skin feeling the ghost of its wings. "Go on, little ghost," she murmurs, her voice a low vibration that barely disturbs the air. "The dark is safer for those with wings like yours." She turns her gaze back to the window. The moon has risen higher now, and the street below is a river of silver and ink. The timber-framed houses lean toward one another across the alley, their upper stories almost touching, like two old crones whispering secrets about the generations they have housed. She imagines the lives unfolding behind those darkened shutters, the sleeping children, the tired laborers, the lovers, the mourners. She feels a profound, detached compassion for them all. They are all bound by the same rhythms of hunger and rest. Yet they move through their lives in such a clatter of noise and expectation. She, in her quiet corner, feels like the still point at the center of a spinning wheel. A distant sound catches her ear, the slow, rhythmic clinking of the night watchman's lantern chain. She watches as the dim, swinging light appears at the end of the street, casting long, erratic shadows that dance against the walls. He is a sturdy man, muffled in a heavy grey cloak, his breath a white plume in the cold air. He pauses beneath her window, looking up for a brief second at the single point of light she provides. She does not pull back. She remains still, a silhouette against the amber glow. He nods, a gesture of silent recognition between two people who know the night. And then he moves on, his footsteps echoing on the cobbles until they are lost in the distance. The silence that follows is even deeper than before. It is a thick, velvet silence that seems to press against her ears. She feels the house settling around Hertha, wood giving a soft, sympathetic groan as the temperature drops, the thatch overhead whispering as a stray breeze ruffles its edges. These are the voices of her companions. She is never truly alone when the house is speaking. She thinks of the way the stones of the walls have absorbed the heat of the day and are now slowly releasing it, a lingering warmth that she can feel if she presses her palm against the plaster. She reflects on the challenges of the coming winter. The price of tallow is rising, and the wood merchant has been grumbling about the muddy tracks in the forest. These are the small anxieties that used to keep her awake, but now she meets them with a quiet, practiced stoicism. She has survived 20 winters in this town, some of them so cold the ink froze in the wells, and she has always found a way. She has a hoard of dried apples in the cellar, a sack of hard-milled flour, and a stack of peat that smells of the ancient fens. She is prepared. There is a great power in being prepared, a quiet, internal fortress that no winter storm can breach. Her mind drifts to the concept of time. In the town, time is a tyrant, measured by the bells and the demands of the market. But here, in her chair by the window, time is a fluid thing. It stretches and folds like a piece of fine silk. She can spend an hour watching the way the candlelight plays upon the grain of her table, or an hour remembering the taste of a peach she ate in a sun-drenched orchard a decade ago. This is the true luxury of her life, the ownership of her own minutes. She is not a slave to the now. She is a traveler through the always. The candle has burned down halfway, its wax forming a complex, frozen sculpture of drips and runs down the side of the holder. She reaches out and touches one of the wax tears. It is smooth and slightly warm, a physical record of the passing hour. She thinks of all the candles she has burned in this room, all the hours she has sat in this exact spot, watching the world go by. Each hour has added a layer of meaning to her life, just as the wax adds to the candle. She is a woman made of time and quietness. The melancholy returns for a moment, but it is a sweet, familiar guest. It is the melancholy of the ending of things, the end of the day, the end of the season, the eventual end of her own story. But there is no fear in it. She sees it as the natural closing of a book, the final, satisfying click of a well-made latch. to have lived a life that is entirely one's own, to have carved a space of peace out of a world of turmoil that is a triumph that requires no fanfare. It is a victory of the spirit that is celebrated in the silence of the night. She rises from her stool, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she is moving through water. She walks to the hearth and adds one small log to the embers, just enough to keep the room from becoming brittle with the cold. The wood catches with a soft orange glow, illuminating her face for a moment, the lines of her forehead, the steadiness of her eyes, the quiet strength of her mouth. She looks into the fire and sees the history of the world in the shifting coals. Fire is the oldest companion of the solitary, a living presence that demands nothing but a bit of wood and a little attention. She moves to her small bookshelf, a luxury she allowed herself years ago. There are only 3 volumes, a book of hours with faded gold leaf, a collection of herbal recipes she has added to in her own hand, and a book of old poems that speak of the sea and the stars. She does not need to read them tonight. She knows the words by heart. They are part of the internal landscape she carries with her. She brushes her fingers over the leather bindings, feeling the history of the hands that made them. In a world where so much is temporary, these books are anchors of permanence. The night has reached its zenith. The stars outside are so bright they seem to be humming, a celestial vibration that she can almost hear if she holds her breath. We shall remain here in the shadows, watching over her as the deep, historical night performs its slowest, most silent rotation, for the air is beginning to carry a new message. It is a subtle shift, one that wouldn't be noticed by the hurried merchants or the rowdy apprentices. But to a woman who lives by the rhythm of her own breath, it is as clear as a bell tolling in an empty field. The season is turning. The lush, damp ripeness of autumn is being refined, sharpened by the first crystalline whispers of winter. The darkness outside is no longer just a velvet curtain. It has become a brittle, translucent shell, smelling of frost-bitten earth and the sharp, clean scent of the high mountains in the small stone house. This seasonal change is not an intrusion, but a homecoming. She feels it in the way the floorboards under her bed seem to shrink and tighten, and in the way the air near the window has developed a thin, silvery edge. Her life, already a masterpiece of quiet adaptation, begins to shift its weight. The preparation for winter is not a frantic race, but a slow, meditative gathering, a squirrel-like layering of warmth and sustenance that brings a profound sense of security. As she sleeps, her subconscious is already auditing her stores, counting the wheels of hard cheese, the jars of salted fat, and the bundles of leeks hanging in the dry, dark corners of the pantry. When the first grey light of this new, colder morning eventually touches the shutters, she does not rise with a start. She waits for the house to tell her it is time. The sounds of the town are different now. The iron-shod wheels of the carts make a higher, more metallic ring on the frozen cobbles, and the voices of the early workers are punctuated by the sharp, rhythmic slapping of arms against chests to keep the blood moving. She reaches for the foot of her bed, where a heavy cloak of boiled wool has replaced the lighter linen wrap of the summer. The fabric is thick and slightly rough, a comforting weight that smells faintly of the cedar chest and the dried wormwood she uses to keep the moths at bay. Her morning routine takes on a new, more urgent focus on the hearth. The fire is no longer just a companion for light. It is the beating heart of her survival. She spends more time kneeling before it, her hands moving with a reverent slowness as she builds the morning blaze. She uses larger logs now, oak and ash, that have been seasoned under the eaves of her small shed. their bark silvered by the weather. The smell of the smoke is different in winter, thicker, sweeter, and more persistent. It clings to her hair and her woolen skirts, a nomadic perfume that marks her as a woman of the hearth. The streets of the town have become quieter, as if the cold has muffled the very air. People move with a purposeful haste, their heads tucked into their collars, their breath blooming like white peonies before their faces. The social dynamics shift to the long, lingering gossip sessions at the well are replaced by brief, shivering exchanges. There is a communal drawing inward, a shared understanding that the external world has become a more hostile place. For the woman who lives alone, this narrowing of the social world is a relief. The curiosity and the whispers of her neighbors are dampened by the frost. Everyone is too busy tending their own fires to wonder about the single candle in her window. She spends the middle of her days in a state of quiet, productive hibernation. The work of her hands changes with the light. The fine silk embroidery is set aside, for the dim winter sun is too weak for such precision. Instead, she turns to the heavier, more tactile crafts. She spins wool-thick greasy fleece that she bought from a shepherd on the last market day of the autumn. The whir of the spinning wheel is a low, hypnotic drone that fills the room, a sound that seems to stitch the silence together. Whir, click, hum. Her fingers become oily from the lanolin, her skin softening even as the air outside grows harsher. There is a deep, primal satisfaction in this work, the transformation of a chaotic cloud of wool into a strong, singular thread. It is a metaphor for her entire existence. Her interactions with the townspeople become even more minimal and focused. She visits the miller to trade a bag of dried rose hips and a tin of her special salve for a sack of coarse oats. The miller is a man of few words, his hair and beard always dusted with a fine white powder like a permanent frost. They do not speak of the weather or the news from the capital. They speak only of the weight of the grain and the quality of the berries. It is a clean, honest transaction, stripped of the social clutter that she finds so exhausting. He respects her because she knows the value of a bushel and the strength of a bargain. In the winter, the town becomes a collection of such essential nodes, each person a vital link in the chain of survival. The emotional landscape of her solitude deepens in the cold. It is not loneliness she feels as she watches the snowflakes begin to spiral past her window. It is a profound, resonant peace. The snow is a great leveler, covering the grand houses of the merchants and the humble cottages of the laborers in the same silent, white shroud. From her window, she watches the town disappear beneath the drifts, its jagged edges softened, its hierarchies buried. In this white world, she feels completely at home. She is a creature of the interior, a master of the small, warm space. She reflects on the nature of protection in this season. The town believes a woman is protected by a husband's walls and a husband's woodpile. But as she sits by her own fire, she realizes that true protection comes from within, from the foresight to dry the herbs, the skill to mend the cloak, and the mental fortitude to embrace the silence. She is not waiting for someone to bring her warmth. She is the source of her own heat. This realization brings a quiet, internal smile to her face, a glow that is more enduring than any ember in the great dot. The evenings in winter are long and magnificent. The darkness arrives early, a heavy blue shadow that rolls down the streets like a slow-moving tide. She lights her candles with a sense of triumph. Each flame is a small sun, a defiance of the great cold that presses against her stones. She prepares a supper of thick pottage pearl barley, dried mushrooms, and a few precious bits of salted pork. The steam rises in a fragrant cloud, misting her windows and making the room feel like a sanctuary at the bottom of the sea. She eats slowly, savoring the warmth as it travels from her throat to her chest, a physical reassurance of her own vitality. She listens to the sounds of the winter night. They are sharper now, more distinct. The crack of a frozen branch in the courtyard, the howl of the wind as it tears through the narrow gaps between the gables, the distant, muffled thud of snow sliding off a roof. These sounds do not frighten her. They are the reports of a world she has successfully negotiated. She is inside, and the cold is outside, and for tonight, that is the only victory that matters. Her thoughts wander to her childhood, to the crowded, noisy house of her youth, where there was never enough space for a single thought to reach its full height. She remembers the constant friction of voices, the demands of siblings, the heavy expectations of her father. She compares it to the crystalline clarity of her current life. Here her thoughts can stretch and grow, expanding until they fill every corner of her stone house. She is the architect of her own mental landscape, and in the winter, that landscape is a place of high, clear peaks and deep, still valleys. The subtle challenges of her society remain, of course, but they are transformed by the season. The priest visits once, his boots heavy with slush, to check on the poor widow and ensure she hasn't frozen to death in her independence. He brings a small loaf of blessed bread, his eyes darting around her neat, warm room with a mixture of confusion and a grudging respect. He finds no misery here, no desperation. He finds a woman who is as composed and as self-contained as the ice on the river. He leaves quickly, his breath trailing behind him, and she returns to her spinning wheel, the blessed bread a small, extra comfort on her shelf. She thinks of the other women she knows, the ones who are trapped in cold marriages or burdened by the endless needs of their kin. She feels a soft, melancholic pity for them, for they are never truly alone with themselves. They are always defined by their service to others. Her solitude, which the town views as a lack, she views as an abundance. She has more time, more peace, and more self-knowledge than any of the protected women in the grand houses. As the night deepens and the fire begins to settle into a bed of pulsing rubies, she takes up a heavy, leather-bound book, the one she has been reading for 3 winters. It is a chronicle of the saints, full of stories of people who went into the desert or the forest to find the divine in the silence. She reads a few lines by the flickering light, her lips moving silently. She doesn't seek the divine in the way the priests do. She finds it in the way the light catches the frost on the glass, and in the way her own hands can create order and beauty out of wool and flame. The seasonal change has brought a new rhythm to her sleep, too. It is deeper, more restorative. The cold outside acts as a catalyst for the warmth inside, making the bed feel like a sacred space. As she prepares to blow out the candle, she feels a profound sense of gratitude for the stones of her house, for the wood in her shed, and for the strength in her own spirit. She is not a woman abandoned. She is a woman who has arrived. We shall stay here, nestled in the heart of the winter night, where the wind performs its low, melancholic cello sweet against the stone corners of the house. The snow continues to fall, a silent, relentless descent of white stars that smothers the town's jagged history in a blanket of absolute peace. Inside, the woman stirs slightly beneath her heavy woolen layers, her breath a rhythmic, mist-like presence in the dark. She is not lonely. She is merely the curator of a very quiet museum, one where the exhibits are the scent of dried time, the texture of a well-worn threshold, and the memory of 1,000 cold mornings met with a steady hand, as the deep indigo of the midnight hour begins to thin into the charcoal grey of a snowy dawn. The silence of the street outside takes on a new quality, a muffled, padded stillness that only a heavy snowfall can provide. When she finally rises, the light that enters through the chinks in her shutters is not the sharp silver of frost, but a soft, diffused luminescence, the color of a dove's wing. She moves to the window and pushes the heavy bolt aside. The wood groans, a dry, wintry sound, and as the shutter swings open, a small drift of powdery snow tumbles onto the sill, sparkling like crushed diamonds in the dim light. The world has been transformed. The narrow alleyway is no longer a path of grey cobbles and dark mud. It is a canyon of pure, unblemished white. The neighbouring houses, with their overhanging jetties, look like old men wearing oversized white caps. There is no sound of carts, no ringing of the blacksmith's hammer, no shouting of apprentices. The snow has enforced a temporary Sabbath upon the town, a mandatory hush that suits her spirit perfectly. She dresses with a slow, focused intent, adding a second kirtle for warmth and wrapping her head in a thick linen wimple that she has lined with rabbit fur, a small luxury she bartered for 2 winters ago. Today, the walk to the well will be a struggle, a labor of knees and lungs through the drifts. She takes up her wooden buckets, their weight familiar and grounding, and steps out into the white world. The cold is a physical shock, a sharp, clean blade that cuts through the lingering warmth of the sleep-heavy house. Her boots sink deep into the snow, making a satisfying, rhythmic crunches with every step, halfway down the alley. Near the spot where the timber-framed apothecary shop leans precariously over the street, she sees another figure. It is Mistress Elspeth, a woman of similar years who lives 3 doors down. Elspeth is a widow, too, but her house is loud with the clamour of a son's growing family, a chaotic, bustling hive that Elspeth often navigates with a look of weary endurance. The 2 women stop, separated by 10 feet of pristine, drifted snow. In the summer, they might have exchanged a dozen words about the price of eggs or the quality of the river water. Now, in the frozen heart of the winter, words seem too heavy to carry through the thin air. Instead, they stand for a long, suspended moment, their breath mingling in a single, shared cloud of white vapor. It is a quiet moment of connection, a silent acknowledgement of their shared status in the town's intricate weave. Elspeth looks at the woman, the one who lives alone in, for a fleeting second. Her eyes betray a profound, wistful envy. She sees the silence that the woman carries with her like a cloak, a silence that Elspeth hasn't tasted in a decade. The woman, in turn, looks at Elspeth and feels a soft, pulsing wave of compassion. She sees the flour on Elspeth's apron, the frantic soot on her cheek, the way her shoulders are perpetually hunched as if bracing for a child's cry. Elspeth reaches out a gloved hand and clears a small patch of snow from a stone mounting block. She produces a small, hard-crusted roll from the pocket of her cloak, still slightly warm from her son's hearth. Hand sets it down on the stone. She does not offer it with a flourish. She simply leaves it there, a small, tan island in the sea of white. She gives a single, slow nod, a gesture that says, "I see you, and I know the weight of the winter." The woman returns the nod, her eyes crinkling at the corners in a ghost of a smile. "God keep you warm, Elspeth," she murmurs. "And you, Martha," the other woman replies, her voice thin and raspy in the cold. That is all. The interaction is over. yet it lingers in the air like the scent of wood smoke. Elspeth turns back toward her crowded hearth, and the woman continues toward the well. The isolation of her life is not a wall, she realizes, but a filter. It strips away the unnecessary, the performative, and the loud, leaving only these small, crystalline moments of true human recognition. The roll on the stone is not just bread, it is a bridge. She reaches the well, which is encrusted in a fantastic architecture of ice. The rope is stiff and stubborn, protesting her touch with a series of sharp, icy cracks. She works the windlass with a slow, steady power, her breath coming in deep, rhythmic lungfuls. The water, when it arrives, is steaming, warmer than the air, a dark and secret treasure pulled from the belly of the earth. She fills her buckets, the weight pulling her shoulders down, anchoring her to the white ground. As she walks back, she retrieves the bread from the stone. It is cold now, but the gesture remains warm in her mind. Back inside her house, the transition from the vast, white exterior to the small, amber interior feels like a homecoming of the soul. She sets the buckets down and immediately goes to the hearth, which has cooled to a bed of grey ash. She coaxes the fire back to life, the small flames licking at the dry birch logs with a sound like a distant, cheering crowd. The rest of the morning is spent in a state of quiet, reflective industry. She eats the roll with a small bowl of hot cider, the spices cinnamon, and a single clove scenting the room with a memory of distant, warmer lands. She reflects on the contrast between her life and Elspeth's. The town views Elspeth as blessed, surrounded by the noise of the next generation, while she is viewed as unfortunate. Yet, as she listens to the absolute, shimmering silence of her room, she knows where the true blessing lies. She has the space to hear her own thoughts, to notice the way the light changes as the clouds move across the winter sun, to feel the texture of the passing hour. She takes up a piece of heavy linen and begins to hem a set of winter shifts for the merchant's daughters. The fabric is cool and smooth, a different texture from the wool she has been working with. Her needle moves with its accustomed grey stitch, pull, sigh. She thinks of the merchant's daughters, young girls full of giggles and anxieties. There lives a series of mirrors reflecting the expectations of their father and their future husbands. She wishes she could give them a piece of her silence, a small portion of the unshakable peace she has found in her solitary stone house. But she knows that silence is a fruit that must be grown, not a gift that can be given. The afternoon light is short-lived. By 3 o'clock, the sun is a pale lemon-yellow disk hanging low over the gables, and by 4, the blue shadows have returned to claim the alleyway. She sets her work aside and prepares for the long evening. This is her favorite time of the winter day, the hour of the narrowing. She draws the heavy woolen curtains, effectively erasing the outside world. The house becomes a self-contained universe, a tiny island of light and warmth in a sea of frozen dark. She lights 2 candles tonight, a celebration of the small connection she made with Elspeth. The extra light makes the room feel festive, the shadows retreating further into the corners. She spends an hour simply sitting, her hands folded in her lap, watching the way the candlelight plays upon the surface of her pewter pitcher. She notices a small dent in the metal, a mark she hadn't seen before, and she wonders about its history. Was it made by her mother, or perhaps by the woman who owned the pitcher before her? Everything in her house has a story, a lineage of touch and use that connects her to the past. She reflects on the nature of solitude. It is not a lack of people, she decides, but a presence of the self. In the quiet, she is not the widow or the seamstress. She is simply Martha consciousness that perceives the world, a heart that beats in time with the ancient rhythms of the earth. The town's judgments and labels are like the snow outside. They may cover the surface of her life, but they cannot change the stone beneath. The evening meal is simpler thick soup of dried peas and onions, flavored with a bit of smoked bacon. She eats it by the fire, the heat of the hearth radiating against her knees. The sound of the wind has intensified, a low, haunting moan that rattles the shutters and makes the candle flames dance. She feels a deep sense of security. The walls are thick, the roof is sound, and she has enough wood to last until the first thaw. In a world of uncertainty, this is her great triumph. As the night deepens, she moves her chair closer to the hearth and picks up her book of herbs. She reads about the properties of the elderberry, how it can ward off the winter humours and bring strength to the blood. She thinks of the spring when the elder trees will bloom in the hedgerows outside the walls, their white blossoms like lace against the green. She is not impatient for the spring, but she acknowledges its inevitability. Life, like the seasons, is a cycle of closing and opening, of sleep and wakefulness. The small connection with Elspeth stays with her as she prepares for bed. It was a moment of profound recognition, a silent bridge built between two very different lives. It reminded her that even in her solitude, she is part of a human landscape. Asterisk. We shall stay here, nestled in the quiet heart of the winter night, where the world is a muffled expanse of white and the stars are the only witnesses to the slow, steady turning of the earth. The snow has ceased its falling, leaving behind a silence so absolute it feels like a physical presence, a soft, cold weight that presses against the stone walls of the house, sealing the woman inside her own private universe. Inside, the air is still and holds the faint, lingering warmth of the evening's fire, a ghostly heat that breathes with the rhythm of her own lungs. She is drifting in that shallow, shimmering space between wakefulness and the deep sea of sleep, where her thoughts are not guided by logic or necessity, but by the gentle, repetitive pulse of her own existence, independence. She realizes in this liminal hour is not a grand or loud thing. It is a series of small, quiet repetitions. It is the way her hand knows the curve of the wooden spoon, the way her feet find the uneven floorboard near the hearth, the way her mind maps the progress of the moon across the ceiling. Breath in, breath out. Stir the coals, bank the ash, light the candle, watch the flame. These are the refrains of her life, the steady, rhythmic beats that create a sense of order in a world that is often chaotic and loud. She thinks of her routine not as a cage, but as a path worn smooth by years of faithful walking. There is a profound comfort in the known, in the predictable, in the small ceremonies of the everyday. She reflects on the passage of time, seeing it not as a linear march toward an end, but as a series of concentric circles, like the ripples in a forest pool. There is the circle of the day, with its morning water and its evening fire. There is the circle of the moon, with its waxing light and its waning shadows. There is the circle of the seasons, the slow, majestic transition from the green of the spring to the white of the winter. And at the center of all these circles, she remains a still point, a quiet observer, a woman who has learned to inhabit the present moment with a singular, focused grace. Time does not happen to her. She happens with time. She flows with the hours, neither resisting their current nor hurrying their progress. The fire glows, the shadows dance. The wind sighs, the house rests. She thinks about the word alone and how the town uses it like a sharp-edged tool. To them, to be alone is to be unfinished, a sentence without a verb, a house without a roof. But in the deep, indigo silence of her chamber, she knows the word has a different meaning. To be alone is to be all one, to be a complete and unified being, no longer fragmented by the needs and expectations of others. Her independence is a garment she has woven herself, thread by thread, year by year. It fits her perfectly, keeping out the chill of judgment and the damp of dependency. It is a heavy, warm, and beautiful thing, and she wears it with a quiet, unassailable dignity. The routine of her days is a lullaby she sings to herself. Each task is a note, each movement a chord. When she mends a tunic, she is not just fixing a garment. She is mending the fabric of her own world, ensuring that everything is whole and sound. When she brews a pot of herb tea, she is not just quenching a thirst. She is performing an alchemy of the spirit, turning the sun-dried plants of the summer into the warmth of the winter. These repetitions do not bore her. They ground her. They are the anchors that keep her boat from drifting in the storms of the world. Sift the flour, knead the dough, fetch the water, pour the tea. Watch the light, feel the dark dot as she lies in the soft, dark cradle of her bed. She thinks of the generations of women who have lived in this town before her. She sees them in her mind's aja, long, silent procession of sisters, wives, and mothers. Many of them never knew the luxury of a quiet house or the freedom of a solitary thought. Their lives were a clamor of voices, a tangle of duties, a constant sacrifice of the self to the collective. She feels a soft, pulsing wave of gratitude for her own life, for the stones that protect her and the silence that sustains her. She is living the dream that many of them could only whisper to the moon in the moments before sleep. She is the keeper of the quiet, the steward of the solitary peace. The night continues its slow, majestic rotation. Outside, the frozen stars wheel across the velvet sky, their light too distant to warm the earth, yet bright enough to guide the soul. She feels a sense of profound connection to the cosmos, a realization that her small life is a vital part of the vast, unfolding story of the universe. She is a stitch in the great embroidery, a drop in the infinite ocean, a breath in the eternal silence. Her independence is not an isolation from the world, but a deeper integration into the true nature of reality. The frost grows, the glass chills, the quilt warms, the heart beats. The night deepens, the soul waits. She reflects on the nature of her thoughts. In the noise of the town, thoughts are often like frightened birds, darting and fluttering, never finding a place to land. But here, in the stillness of the winter night, her thoughts are like slow-moving clouds, drifting across the sky of her mind, changing shape but never losing their essential peace. She thinks of the people she has known, the ones who sought power, the ones who sought wealth, the ones who sought the approval of the crowd. She sees their lives as frantic and exhausted, like children chasing their own shadows. Her own life, by contrast, is a seated meditation, a long, slow exhale that has lasted for decades. The routine is her teacher. It has taught her that there is no such thing as a small task. To sweep a floor is to clear the mind. To light a candle is to find the internal light. To listen to the silence is to hear the voice of the world. She finds beauty in the most humble of objects, the rough texture of a ceramic bowl, the smell of clean linen, the way the light catches the dust motes in the air. These are the treasures of her kingdom, and she values them more than all the gold in the merchant's coffers. They are real, they are tangible, and they are hers. Whir of the wheel, click of the needle. softness of wool, strength of thread, turn of the page, close of the eye. The passage of time is a gentle teacher, too. It has smoothed the sharp edges of her grief and tempered the heat of her youthful desires. It has given her a perspective that is as wide and as clear as the horizon. She sees her life not as a diminishing thing, but as a ripening thing. She is like a fruit that has hung on the branch through the heat and the wind, becoming sweeter and more concentrated with every passing season. The winter of her life is not a time of loss, but a time of essence. Everything that was unnecessary has fallen away, leaving behind only that which is true and enduring. She thinks of the morning that will eventually come, the first light touching the snow, the first sound of the watchman's bell, the first movement of the town. She will meet it with the same calm resolve she has always shown. She will rise, she will fetch the water, she will light the fire. The routine will begin again, a familiar and comforting song. But she is in no hurry for the morning. The night is her sanctuary, a place where time stands still and the soul can simply be. The moon sets, the dark holds. The house sighs, the woman dreams. The peace remains, the silence speaks, as she drifts further into the dreamless depths of the night. She feels a sense of absolute completion. There is nothing she needs to change, nothing she needs to achieve, nothing she needs to prove. She is enough. Her house is enough. Her life is enough. The independence she has forged is not a fortress to keep people out, but a garden where she has finally learned to grow herself. She is the gardener of her own spirit, the architect of her own peace, the mistress of her own time. The story of her life is not told in the grand annals of the town, nor in the ledgers of the guild, nor in the sermons of the priest. It is told in the rhythmic creak of her spinning wheel, in the steady glow of her candle, and in the profound, resonant silence of her winter nights. It is a story of quiet resilience, of gentle adaptation, and of the unshakable strength that lives in the heart of a woman who has learned to be her own companion. The night watchman passes one final time, his voice a faint melodic murmur that barely disturbs the frost on the window pane. "All's well," he says, and he is more right than he can possibly know. In this small stone house, in the heart of the historical night, everything is exactly as it should be. The fire is a memory of warmth, the dark is a blanket of peace, and the woman is a soul at rest. We shall remain here in the perfect, suspended moment of the deep midnight, where the silence is not an absence, but a heavy, velvet presence that cradles the stone house and all within it. The stars outside have reached their highest point, burning with a cold, distant clarity that mirrors the stillness of the woman's heart. She is adrift in the great, dark ocean of sleep, where time has no meaning and the only compass is the steady, rhythmic pull of her own breath. But the night, however vast, must eventually yield to the persistent pull of the morning. And so we watch as the charcoal sky begins to soften into a bruised, pearly grey. The transition is a slow, methodical unfolding. It begins not with light, but with the first tentative sounds of a world reawakening. A shudder creaks in the distance. A lone raven calls from the cathedral spire. The heavy, rhythmic thud-thud of a baker's apprentice pounding dough begins to vibrate through the frozen earth. Inside the house, the woman stirs. This is her first routine, the most ancient of all. The gentle return from the shadow world to the world of substance. She does not wake with a start, but with a gradual awareness of the weight of her blankets and the chill of the air upon her cheeks. Her feet find the floorboards with a soft, familiar precision. Each morning is a mirror of the one before, yet each possesses its own subtle, internal weather. Today, the wood feels particularly dry and resonant, a sharp clack echoing in the dawn hush. She reaches for her woolen kirtle, the fabric stiff and cold until it meets the furnace of her skin. There is a quiet endurance in this first act of the Datha, willingness to step out from the warmth of the bed and face the demands of the cold. It is a small victory, won every morning with the same steady resolve. She moves to the hearth, her hands performing the liturgy of the fire. She rakes the grey, powdery ash, uncovering the secret pulsing heart of the embers she banked the night before. This is the core of her independence, the ability to keep the flame alive, to ensure that the hearth never truly goes cold. She feeds it shavings of cedar, then split logs of oak, blowing softly until the smoke turns from grey to white, and finally, a bright, cheerful orange flame leaps upward. The crackle of the wood is the first voice of her day, a friendly, domestic sound that pushes back the lingering shadows of the night. Stir the coals, feed the flame. Watch the smoke, feel the warmth. The trip to the well is a meditation in motion. The snow from the previous night has settled into a firm, glistening crust that crunches musically beneath her boots. She walks with her head held high, her eyes tracing the familiar geometry of the town's rooftops against the pale sky. She meets the same few people she meets every morning: the night watchman, weary and red-eyed, the milkmaid with her clattering pails, the old friar heading to matins. Their greetings are minimal, a murmured God's morning that hangs in the air like a puff of smoke. There is a profound stability in these brief, repetitive encounters. They are the landmarks of her social world, the fixed points that tell her she is still part of the human story, even if she occupies its quietest chapter at the well. The iron handle is a searing cold against her palm, even through her thick woolen mittens. She winds the rope with a slow, deliberate strength, her muscles remembering the weight of the water across the decades. Each pull is a testament to her self-reliance. She is her own beast of burden, her own provider. The water splashes into her buckets with a dark, metallic resonance, a sound that seems to echo the depth of the well itself. She carries the weight back to her house, her gait balanced and sure. A woman who knows exactly how to carry her own burdens. Back inside, the house has begun to breathe with the heat of the fire. She prepares her breakfast, a simple bowl of porridge made from the oats she bartered for, sweetened with a few dried currants. She eats by the window, watching the town fully awaken. The light is different today than it was yesterday. It is a flatter, more silver light, promising a day of high clouds and still air. She notices the way the frost has formed a delicate, lace-like pattern on the corners of the glass, a transient art that will be gone by noon. This is the joy of her routine, the ability to notice the minute, variations in the familiar. The middle of the day is given over to her labor. Today, it is the preparation of a large batch of beeswax candles for the parish church. This is a finer, more fragrant task than the dipping of tallow. The wax comes in heavy, golden blocks that smell of summer meadows and hidden hives. She melts it in a copper pot over a slow heat, the scent filling the house until the very stones seem to breathe of honey. She prepares the wixlong. Braided strands of cotton and begins the slow process of building the candles. Dip, lift, cool. Dip, lift, wait. The rhythm is a lullaby for the waking mind. Each dip adds a microscopic layer of gold. She thinks about the light these candles will provide, the way they will illuminate the carved faces of the saints, the way they will flicker over the grief of a mourner or the hope of a bride. Her work is a bridge between the mundane and the divine, a quiet service rendered in the privacy of her own home. She feels a deep sense of purpose in this repetitive action. She is not just making a product, she is participating in the light of the world. As she works, her mind wanders through the galleries of her memory. She thinks of her grandmother, who taught her the secret of the wax, and of the long line of women whose hands have performed these same motions for 1,000 years. She feels their presence in the room, a silent, supportive sisterhood of the hearth and the needle. They understood, as she does, that a life is built out of these small, focused moments of industry. They knew that the routine is not a burden, but a garment that protects the soul from the vastness of the world. The afternoon brings a visitor, a rare occurrence that breaks the surface of her solitude like a stone dropped into a still pond. It is the tanner's wife, a woman of great girth and even greater anxieties, who comes seeking a salve for her husband's cracked and aching hands. They sit for a few moments by the fire, the tanner's wife doing most of the talking, her voice a rapid, nervous flutter against the steady hum of the house. The woman listens with a quiet, detached empathy. She offers a small jar of ointment made from calendula and beeswax, her movements calm and reassuring. "You have such peace here." Martha, the tanner's wife, sighs, looking around the neat, quiet room with a look of genuine bewilderment. "How do you bear the silence?" "I think it would drive me to the madhouse in a week." The woman offers a small, enigmatic smile. "The silence is not empty, Agnes. It is just a different kind of conversation. You have to listen very closely to hear what it's saying." Agnes shakes her head, clearly not understanding, but she takes the salve with a look of gratitude. She leaves a small loaf of white bread and a handful of dried apples on the tabouret, fair trade for the medicine. When she leaves, the silence rushes back in, but it feels different now, more profound for having been briefly interrupted. The woman realizes that her solitude is a choice she makes every day, a deliberate turning toward the internal light. The day begins to narrow as the sun dips behind the cathedral spire. The long blue shadows of the winter evening stretch across the floor, reclaiming the space inch by inch. She sets aside her candle making and prepares for the night. She sweeps the hearth, the rhythmic swish-swish of the broom, a final cleaning of the day's thoughts. She puts away her tools, each one returning to its accustomed place with a soft, metallic click. The order of her house is a reflection of the order of her mind. Everything has a place, and everything is in its place. She prepares a simple supper, the white bread from Agnes, a wedge of hard cheese, and a cup of warm ale flavored with a bit of ginger. She eats in the deepening twilight, the only light the dying glow of the fire. This is the hour of reflection, the time when the day's activities are distilled into the evening's wisdom. She thinks about the tanner's wife and her fear of the silence. She realizes that most people are afraid of the silence because they are afraid of what they might find. They're the echoes of their own regrets, the shadows of their own fears. But she has made peace with her shadows. She has invited them to sit by her fire, and she has found that they are not monsters, but merely the darker parts of her own story. The passage of time feels particularly tangible tonight. She looks at her hands, the skin thin and translucent as parchment, the veins like blue rivers tracing a map of her life. These hands have done much work, seen much change, and held much quiet. They are the instruments of her independence, and she regards them with a quiet, appreciative love. She is not afraid of growing old, for she sees it as a process of becoming more essentially herself. Every year that passes is a layer of wax added to the candle of her life, making the light steadier and more golden. The light fades, the dark grows, the hearth cools, the soul warms. She lights a single candle, one of her own golden beeswax creations, and sits in her high-backed chair. She does not read tonight. She simply sits and watches the flame. The candle smells of 1,000 summer flowers, a concentrated essence of life that fills the small room. She listens to the town settling. The sounds are the same as yesterday, yet slightly different. The watchman has a bit of a cough tonight. The tavern song is a different tune. The wind has a slightly more northerly edge. We shall stay here in the golden, beeswax-scented quiet, for the night has reached its most profound depth. That sacred hour when the town's heartbeat slows to a near halt, and the only sound is the soft, rhythmic sigh of the winter wind against the eaves. The woman lies in the cocoon of her bed, her mind drifting through the final, shimmering fragments of the day's memories, watching as they dissolve into the vast, dark tapestry of her history. This is the hour of transition, not just between waking and sleep, but between the woman she was today and the woman she will become tomorrow, a seamless, quiet evolution that requires no fanfare, only the steady, unblinking witness of the stone walls that have held her peace for so many years. As she hovers in this soft, liminal space, her thoughts turn to the nature of closure. To the world outside, closure is a grand event, a wedding, a death, the completion of a cathedral, the signing of a treaty. But to her, closure is a much smaller, much more frequent thing. It is the click of the latch at dusk. It is the final smoothing of a linen sheet. It is the way the last ember of the hearth fire turns to a pale, grey ghost. Every day of her independent life is a completed story, a perfect circle that closes upon itself with a sigh of satisfaction. She does not look for a grand ending, for she understands that the beauty of her life lies in its continuity, in the way one quiet day flows into the next, like the steady, silver current of the river that skirts the town walls. She reflects on the many seasons that have passed over this roof. She remembers the springs when the mud was so deep it felt as though the earth were trying to swallow the cobbles, and the summers when the air was so thick with the scent of lilies and dust that she could almost taste the sun. She thinks of the autumns of harvest and the winters of ice. Each season has demanded something of her, and each season has given something back. She has learned that life is not a struggle to be won, but a rhythm to be followed. She is like the ancient moss that clings to the north side of the cathedral and resilient and finding its own nourishment in the damp and the shade, in the silence. She feels a soft, pulsing warmth toward the town that surrounds her. She thinks of the people she has seen today, the girl with the sick child, the tanner's wife with her nervous chatter, the night watchman with his rhythmic cry. She sees them all as fellow travelers, each navigating their own labyrinth of shadows and light. She feels no bitterness toward the whispers or the sideways glances, for she understands that they are born of a world that fears the very silence she has befriended. She offers them a silent blessing, a wish that they, too, might one day find a small, stone-walled sanctuary where they can be truly themselves. The room is dark now, the candle long since extinguished, but she can see the world with her inner eye. She'll see the heavy oak table, the copper pot, the bundles of herbs, the stack of finished candles. They are more than just objects. They are the milestones of her journey. They are the physical evidence of her agency, the proof that a woman alone can build a world that is whole and beautiful and sufficient. She feels a profound, settling pride, not the loud pride of the marketplace, but a deep, subterranean glow that warms her from the inside out. She has done what she set out to do. She has lived on her own terms, and she has found that those terms are good. The passage of time no longer feels like a thief to her. She does not mourn the youth that has faded or the strength that has mellowed into a more calculated endurance. Instead, she views time as a master carver, slowly stripping away the excess to reveal the essential grain of the wood. She is more herself now than she has ever been. Every wrinkle on her hand is a path she has walked. Every grey hair is a winter she has survived. She is a living chronicle of her own choices, and she finds the story to be one of quiet, enduring grace. The stars wheel, the earth turns. The house waits, the soul learns. She thinks of the morning that will come, the first grey light, the cold floor, the task of the fire. It does not feel like a burden. It feels like an invitation. She knows that tomorrow will be much like today, and she finds an immense oceanic peace in that knowledge. There will be water to fetch, bread to bake, and stitches to place. There will be the same small interactions, the same rhythmic sounds, the same internal conversations. To some, this might seem like a small life, but to her, it is as vast as the sky. Within the frame of her routine, she has found infinite variety. No two fires burn exactly the same way. No two pieces of linen feel identical under the needle. No two silences have the same depth as she sinks deeper into the mattress. The boundaries of her physical body seem to soften and blur. She feels as though she is merging with the house, her breath becoming the wind in the chimney, her heartbeat becoming the slow, woody settling of the floorboards. She is the stone, she is the timber, she is the thatch. She is the history of this small corner of the world, a quiet presence that will remain long after her name has been forgotten. She is part of the endurance of the town, one of the silent pillars that holds up the sky. The melancholy that has been her companion for so many years makes a final, soft appearance. It is a gentle thing now, like the blue haze that hangs over the river at dawn. It is the melancholy of knowing that all things must eventually pass, but it is tempered by the joy of having truly been present for the journey. She has not blinked. She has not looked away. She has seen the shadows and the light, and she has found them both necessary. She is ready for whatever the next circle of time brings, whether it be the bite of a frost or the warmth of a spring sun. The night is long, the night is kind. The world is gone, the peace is mine. She imagines the other solitary women, those who lived 100 years before her, and those who will live 100 years after. She feels a silver thread connecting her to the lineage of the quiet, a sisterhood of the independent. They are the ones who kept the fires when the men were at war. They are the ones who knew the secrets of the plants when the physicians were lost in their books. They are the ones who found God in the silence of their own kitchens. She is not a deviation from the norm. She is part of an ancient and necessary tradition. She is the keeper of the home flame, the one who ensures that the world remains human even in its darkest hours. The town watchman is far away now, his voice a tiny, melodic spark in the vast, freezing dark. All is well, he murmurs to the empty streets. She hears him, and for the first time, she feels as though she is the one reassuring him. Yes, she thinks, all is well. The words are a lullaby, a final seal upon the day. All the challenges, all the small slights, all the heavy labors, they are all balanced by the absolute, crystalline peace of this moment. She has earned this rest, just as she has earned every inch of her freedom. Her breathing becomes slower, deeper, as regular as the ticking of a clock she does not own. The world of stone and fabric is falling away, replaced by the world of dreams, place where the herbs never stop blooming and the fire never needs to be banked. But even as she drifts, a part of her remains anchored to the room, to the smell of the beeswax and the lavender, to the feel of the heavy quilts. She is safe. She is whole. She is home. The night moves toward the dawn with a slow, majestic inevitability. The stars begin to lose their sharp edges, the sky turning from black to the deep, translucent blue of a blackbird's egg. The first birder, small, brave robin, gives a tentative, shivering chirp from the courtyard wall. It is the signal that the story is continuing, that the world is beginning its next rotation. But here, in the small stone house, the woman remains in the perfect suspended peace of her completion. She is drifting now, a leaf on a dark river, carried by a current she trusts completely. There is no more need for thought, no more need for reflection. There is only the sensation of being held, of being known, of being at rest. The independence she fought for, the routine she cultivated, the solitude she embraced, they have all led her to this. A sleep so profound and so peaceful that it feels like a benediction. The house stands silent in the pre-dawn light, a sturdy, humble monument to a life lived with intention. The town will wake, the noise will return, and the woman will rise to meet it all with her accustomed grace. But for now, there is only the silence. There is only the dark. There is only the steady, quiet breath of a soul that has finally, fully found its place in the world, as the last shadow dissolves into the grey of the morning. We leave her there, tucked safely within the folds of her own story. The cycle will continue, the fire will be lit, and the candle will burn once more. Her life is a quiet song that never truly ends, a steady light that never truly goes out. In the heart of the history, in the heart of the town, and in the heart of the night, she remains. Sleep comes now, not as an ending, but as a soft, velvet bridge to the next beginning. The air is still, the world is hushed, and the woman is at peace. All is well, all is quiet, all is exactly as it should be. The story drifts away like smoke from a dying fire, leaving behind only the warmth, the silence, and the promise of a new day.